You know, people often ask me how to let go of someone they love, or how to stop feeling so emotionally overwhelmed by things they can't control. And I tell them, you don't just let go. You transform the relationship you have with your own dependency. Emotional detachment is not about turning cold or becoming numb. It's about reclaiming your responsibility for inner stability, learning to build your own ground so that when life shakes, you don't collapse with it. Because make no mistake, life will shake you. Relationships will end, people will disappoint you, and plans will fall apart. The question isn't whether you'll face chaos. The question is, will you face it willingly, or will you let it destroy you? Before we go deeper, let me remind you, if you're someone who's seeking strength, wisdom, and clarity in a chaotic world, then make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on future lessons like this. What we're talking about here isn't entertainment, it's transformation. And the cost of not learning it is too high. Now, here's where most people misunderstand emotional attachment. They think it's the person they can't let go of. But it's almost never the person. It's the idea of the person. It's the story they've built in their minds, the comfort, the validation, the sense of completeness they once felt when that person was there. They're not grieving a human being. They're grieving a narrative, a fantasy that gave structure to their uncertainty. And when that story collapses, their identity collapses with it, because a part of their internal foundation wasn't self-built, it was outsourced to someone else. You see, when we form emotional bonds, we don't just share feelings, we project parts of ourselves. Carl Jung wrote about this with terrifying precision. We cast our unlived potential, our unmet needs, our suppressed traits onto others, and then we fall in love with our own projection. That's not love. That's dependency disguised as connection. You've latched onto someone not because of who they truly are, but because of what they symbolize: safety, purpose, hope, rescue. The tragedy is, symbols can't hold your weight forever. People drop the roles you assigned them. And when they do, you feel like a part of you died, because in a way, it did. The part of you that depended on them to feel whole. That's why heartbreak hurts so profoundly. It's not just about losing affection. It's about losing identity. The pain isn't only grief. It's disintegration. You've borrowed stability from someone else. And now that it's gone, your psyche doesn't know where to stand. You thought you were in love, but what you really entered into was a silent transaction. I'll give you affection if you give me a sense of self. But no human being can fulfill that indefinitely. They might carry you for a while, but sooner or later, the weight becomes unbearable and they let go. Not out of cruelty, but because it was never their burden to carry. So, what are you actually grieving? Are you mourning the loss of intimacy, or the collapse of the illusion that someone else could fix your chaos? Because that's the brutal truth most people don't want to face. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the way you felt when they were near. They represented peace, but they weren't the source of it. They were a mirror reflecting a part of you that you never developed. And now that the mirror is gone, you're forced to face your own emptiness. That emptiness isn't punishment, it's an invitation. It's your psyche's way of saying, build your own foundation now. But people run from that. They distract themselves with new relationships, entertainment, alcohol, work, anything, to avoid the silence. Because the silence reveals truth, and truth demands responsibility. And that's what emotional detachment really means. Responsibility for your own state of mind, not apathy, not indifference, responsibility. You can't detach healthily without asking, what part of myself did I place in someone else's hands? Did you depend on them for confidence, validation, hope? Then you have to reclaim those parts. Because as long as you expect others to carry your unhealed pieces, you'll remain emotionally enslaved. That's not love, that's avoidance. You're outsourcing your self-development, and that will always end in suffering. You can't build a durable identity on borrowed bricks. So here's where the transformation begins, in honest interrogation. Sit down with your pain and ask, what did I see in them that I'm missing in myself? If it was strength, why haven't you built your own? If it was calm, why haven't you cultivated peace within? Every attachment built on self-avoidance is a ticking time bomb, because no one can permanently save you from your own unresolved chaos. They might soothe it for a while, but sooner or later, life forces you to face what you've been running from. And when that moment comes, it's either breakdown or breakthrough. Emotional freedom is born the moment you stop expecting rescue. That's when you start reclaiming authorship over your own inner world. But to do that, you must face your emotional chaos voluntarily. You have to walk into the storm, eyes open, knowing it will hurt, but also knowing it's the only way out. Because avoidance doesn't dissolve pain, it multiplies it. The monsters you refuse to face don't disappear. They grow in the shadows of your unconscious until one day they burst out and destroy everything you've built. The paradox of healing is that you must move toward what terrifies you. The only way to stop running is to turn around and face it. That's why every myth, every religious story carries the same archetype. The hero descends into the chaos, slays the dragon, and returns transformed. You don't wait for the storm to pass, you become the one who walks through it. And yes, it's painful. But pain faced voluntarily becomes power. Pain avoided becomes prison. That's why I say stop asking how to let go. Ask instead, what am I holding on to that's keeping me weak? Because what you call attachment might be self-abandonment in disguise. True detachment isn't the death of emotion, it's the birth of strength. It's standing in the fire and realizing it can't destroy you. It's the ability to feel everything, grief, loss, longing, without losing yourself inside it. That's not coldness. That's maturity. That's evolution. And it starts here with brutal honesty, courageous confrontation, and the decision to build from within what you once sought without. Because no one, not a lover, not a parent, not even God himself, can carry your emotional responsibilities for you. That's your cross to bear. And the beauty of carrying it voluntarily is that over time, it transforms you into someone unbreakable, someone capable of love without need, strength without arrogance, and peace without illusion. That's the foundation of emotional sovereignty. That's where freedom begins. Now, let's go deeper into the psychology of this transformation. Because detachment isn't about cutting ties with people, it's about cutting ties with illusions. Most people don't realize that the real source of their suffering isn't loss, it's misalignment. When your internal architecture is built on fantasy instead of truth, every disruption feels catastrophic. That's why emotional chaos feels like death. A false structure is collapsing. And instead of rebuilding properly, you try to resurrect the illusion. You chase, you beg, you ruminate, you stalk, you spiral, not because you love the other person, but because you're addicted to the story that once made you feel safe. But here's a principle worth engraving on your mind. Safety that depends on control is not safety. It's anxiety with better marketing. You can't build peace on the condition that life or people behave a certain way. Real peace comes from internal order, from having your values properly arranged so that no external chaos can destabilize you. And that begins with truth. Because truth, not comfort, is what keeps your psyche upright when the storms hit. The human mind is structured around hierarchies of value. These hierarchies determine what we notice, what we pursue, and what we're willing to endure. When truth sits at the top of that hierarchy, everything beneath it aligns coherently. But when comfort, approval, or emotional relief sits at the top, chaos takes over. Because then your decisions are guided by short-term relief instead of long-term integrity. You sacrifice growth for pleasure. You trade strength for validation. And every time you do that, you build dependency instead of sovereignty. People often say, I just want to be happy. But happiness, when pursued directly, becomes a trap. Happiness is not a goal. It's a byproduct of integrity. It's what happens when your thoughts, actions, and values are in harmony. The moment you chase happiness itself, you start negotiating with truth. You lie to yourself about what's working. You stay in unhealthy relationships because leaving feels painful. You silence your conscience because honesty threatens comfort. That's how you lose yourself, one small self-betrayal at a time. The cure is reordering your hierarchy of values. Truth must come first. Always. Because truth, no matter how painful, is your only reliable compass in chaos. Truth says, this attachment is unsustainable. Truth says, this relationship is built on fantasy. Truth says, you're seeking rescue instead of responsibility. And it's painful to hear. But that pain is cleansing. It burns away illusion. And in its place, it leaves clarity. Clarity is strength. Clarity is freedom. The second value in that hierarchy must be responsibility. Responsibility is what transforms suffering into growth. When you take responsibility for your emotions, you stop being a victim of circumstance. You stop saying they made me feel this way. You start saying, I allowed this dynamic because I hadn't yet built the strength to say no. Responsibility is the gateway to power. It doesn't remove pain, it repurposes it. It turns heartbreak into fuel, rejection into redirection, and failure into wisdom. And responsibility isn't just philosophical, it's deeply biological. When you take responsibility, your brain rewires itself to recognize you as the agent of your life, not its casualty. You send a signal to your nervous system, I'm in control now. And that signal changes everything. Your stress response softens, your confidence grows, your capacity to love expands. Because love without responsibility isn't love, it's dependency, dressed in romance. Next comes meaning. Meaning is what structures chaos into coherence. Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist who survived the concentration camp, said it best. Those who have a why can bear almost any how. Meaning doesn't erase pain, but it gives it direction. It says, this suffering is not pointless. It's forging something in me. When you have meaning, heartbreak becomes initiation, not destruction. You begin to see that the collapse of an attachment is not the end of your life story. It's a chapter of transformation. But meaning requires sacrifice. You have to let go of shallow pleasures, immediate relief, and ego-driven fantasies to serve something higher. And that's what most people fear. Not loss, but sacrifice. They don't want to give up the comforting illusion that someone else can make them whole. They don't want to face the mirror that shows how much of their suffering was self-inflicted. But meaning demands that you do. It demands that you walk willingly into the desert of your own making, face the ruins, and start rebuilding brick by brick with truth and responsibility as your tools. That's maturity. That's rebirth. Reordering your values also means learning the right relationship with discomfort. Pain is not your enemy. It's your instructor. Every time you avoid discomfort, you avoid growth. Every time you lean into it voluntarily, you gain wisdom and resilience. Discipline is the bridge between truth and peace. It's not punishment. It's structure. It's how you turn philosophy into habit. You wake up and do what's right even when it doesn't feel good. That's discipline. You tell the truth even when it costs you. That's discipline. You sit in silence instead of reaching for distraction. That's discipline. Discipline is emotional self-respect in action. It's saying, I care enough about my future to endure temporary discomfort. And that's how character is built. Character isn't some abstract moral virtue. It's the psychological spine that holds you upright when everything else collapses. Character is consistency across chaos. It's integrity under pressure. And character, once forged, becomes your shield against emotional slavery. When you know who you are, you can love deeply without being destroyed. You can care without clinging. You can let go without breaking. That's emotional sovereignty, not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. But here's the part that makes people stumble. The process is ongoing. You don't reorder your values once and call it a day. You reaffirm them daily through choices. Life constantly tempts you to slip back into comfort, avoidance, and dependency. Every time you silence truth for convenience, you betray yourself a little. Every time you act from fear instead of principle, you reinforce weakness. But every time you choose truth, responsibility, and meaning over ease, even when no one's watching, you strengthen the foundation of your soul. And over time, that foundation becomes unshakable. When truth is your compass, responsibility your path, and meaning your destination, you no longer need external validation to feel complete. You stop begging for love and start embodying it. You stop seeking approval and start commanding respect, not from arrogance, but from alignment. You become someone whose peace is self-sustained, whose love is offered freely, not desperately. That's the kind of strength that transforms relationships. Because only when you no longer need people to complete you, can you love them without condition. So when people ask how to detach emotionally, I say, stop trying to detach. Start trying to grow. Because as you grow, what you were once attached to falls away naturally. You don't have to tear it off. It simply no longer fits. You evolve out of illusion, the way a tree outgrows the seed that birthed it. That's the true essence of letting go, not force, but transformation. You don't lose what's real. You lose what was never meant to last. And what remains is the part of you that can finally stand alone, strong, awake, and free. To truly detach, you must first understand why attachment feels so consuming. At its core, emotional attachment is a survival instinct gone rogue. The human nervous system is wired for connection. When we bond deeply, the brain releases chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine, nature's way of reinforcing relationships that once ensured our safety and reproduction. But in the modern world, those same chemicals can imprison us. You start confusing emotional intensity for love, craving for connection, and dependency for devotion. The body clings, even when the mind knows it should let go. You're not just fighting your thoughts, you're fighting millions of years of biological conditioning. That's why it feels like dying, because on a primal level, your body believes it is. It's not weakness, it's wiring. But wiring can be rewritten. To rewire it, you must teach your nervous system that safety doesn't come from attachment, it comes from integrity. That means building internal order. Most people live in psychological chaos, scattered values, inconsistent habits, no defined purpose. They react to emotions like waves instead of steering the ship. The goal is to build enough structure within that when external storms rage, you remain steady. That steadiness comes from identity, not a shallow label, but a deeply structured sense of self, grounded in purpose, discipline, and meaning. And identity, like a fortress, must be built stone by stone. You begin by defining who you are independently of anyone else. That sounds simple, but it's revolutionary, because most people don't know who they are outside of their roles. They're someone's partner, parent, employee, or friend. But remove those titles, and the silence terrifies them. That silence is the absence of self-definition. If you want freedom, you must fill that silence consciously. You decide who you are and who you are becoming. What virtues matter most to you? Honesty, discipline, courage, compassion. What values do you refuse to compromise, even under pressure? These answers form the spine of your identity. Without them, your emotions rule you. With them, your emotions become information, not dictators. But knowing who you are isn't enough. You must act it out. Identity is not theory, it's repetition. Every choice is a declaration of character. Every boundary you enforce is a statement of self-respect. Every time you tell the truth, even when it costs you, you strengthen your psychological muscle. You're training your nervous system to associate discomfort with integrity rather than avoidance. Over time, your emotions begin to align with your values. Fear becomes guidance. Pain becomes feedback. Anger becomes fuel. This is what maturity feels like. Not the absence of emotion, but mastery of it. Still, mastery doesn't mean perfection. You will fail. You will fall back into old patterns. You'll chase illusions, crave comfort, and seek validation. But if your identity is structured, you'll recover faster. You'll recognize the pattern, course correct, and return to your foundation. That's the difference between chaos and resilience. Chaos reacts. Resilience recalibrates. And recalibration is everything. Because detachment isn't a single act of cutting ties, it's a continual process of returning to yourself. Let me give you an example. Suppose someone leaves you. The old self says, I'm broken. I'll never recover. But the structured self says, something I depended on is gone, but the core of me remains intact. That small shift changes everything. Instead of spiraling into despair, you begin rebuilding. You ask, what did I learn? What does this loss reveal about the holes in my foundation? Maybe it exposes your fear of loneliness. Good. Now you know where to focus. Maybe it highlights your need for external validation. Excellent. That's your next area of growth. Pain becomes the blueprint for self-construction. Every heartbreak becomes a lesson in architecture. And here's a profound truth. The universe, in its ruthless mercy, will keep breaking what's false in you until only what's real remains. That's why certain patterns repeat. You attract similar people, similar pain, similar chaos, again and again. It's not punishment. It's curriculum. Life will present the same emotional test until you learn the principle it's teaching. Self-authorship. The moment you stop outsourcing your peace, the test ends. Because you've outgrown the lesson. But this growth requires courage. Not the loud kind, the quiet, consistent kind. The courage to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. To say no to distractions. To walk away from relationships that contradict your values, even if your heart still aches for them. That's not coldness, that's discipline. You're choosing long-term alignment over short-term relief. Every time you do that, your nervous system learns a new pattern. Safety in self, not in attachment. That's emotional evolution. Now, some people mistake detachment for emotional suppression. They think strength means not feeling at all. That's a tragic misunderstanding. Suppression doesn't heal, it festers. The emotions you bury don't die. They metastasize into anxiety, resentment, or depression. True detachment doesn't deny emotion, it contextualizes it. You feel deeply, but you don't drown. You allow grief, but you also allow it to move through you. You honor the love, but you release the illusion. You mourn the story that ended, but you don't confuse the ending with your own destruction. That balance to feel without being consumed is the mark of maturity. One practical way to train this balance is through observation. The next time you're hit with an emotional surge, pause. Don't react. Don't rush to explain or fix it. Just observe. Name it. This is sadness. This is longing. This is fear. Naming creates distance. Distance creates awareness. Awareness dissolves identification. Suddenly, you're no longer the emotion, you're the observer of it. And the observer can choose. This is the essence of emotional sovereignty. The ability to notice without becoming possessed. You can't control what arises, but you can control what you do with it. And that choice is the birthplace of freedom. You also have to stop romanticizing chaos. Some people mistake emotional volatility for depth. They believe intensity equals meaning. But drama isn't depth, it's disorder. True depth is calm. It's being able to sit in the silence of your own mind without needing external stimulation to feel alive. That's what scares people, the quiet. Because in silence, there's no distraction, no performance, no escape, just you, your thoughts, your wounds, your truth. But that silence is sacred. It's where integration happens. It's where your fragmented parts begin to reconcile. And when they do, you no longer cling to chaos. You choose peace not because it's easier, but because you've earned it. And eventually, something beautiful happens. The emotions that once controlled you become your compass. They no longer dictate your behavior. They inform your understanding. You stop chasing people who replicate your pain. You stop negotiating your integrity for connection.